Hi guys, in this video I'm going to go over step-by-step instructions on how to install FPP 6.x. These instructions would be pertinent for future versions and older versions with just some minor variations, but for the most part it should be fairly accurate. I have some links down below to the different chapters because there's so many different variations of FPP devices and installation methods. Not all of them are going to apply to you. So feel free to skip around to the chapter that's going to apply to you. Before beginning, you probably want to discover what type of network you're going to use your FPP in. I've got a link to a video up here about some common show networks. So you might want to review that if you're not sure how you're going to use your FPP in your network. Also down below, I've got several links to different resources that'll probably be helpful, including the FPP Manual, which also has some step-by-step instructions, and a lot of other good resources that might help you. So in this video, we're going to be covering what you need, the different installation methods, how to get the FPP image, how to write the image, and the initial setup process. After the initial setup process, then it's going to go on to the more detailed section, and I'll probably have a video about that following. Okay, so we're going to go over what you need. So you need a compatible device. This is typically a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone system, either a BeagleBone Black or Pocket Beagle, and there's some other BeagleBone variants that might be available. Check the FPP manual for the most current list of supported devices. Then you got the micro SD card. The micro SD card is the heart and brains of your whole show and the controller. So you might not want to skimp with that. Get a good quality name brand card and one that has a good speed. Application class is usually a better class because it has a higher speed read and write attributes, where the class 10 cards are mostly just writing attributes and the read speeds might not be the speed that works best for you. Be careful with ordering cheap cards like eBay and sometimes on Amazon, because there are quite a few counterfeit cards out on the market. So you might want to be careful. You really only need an 8 gig card to run FPP, which would be more than enough for most people, but 8 gig cards are really kind of hard to get right now. So a 16 gig card is more than enough. Let me show you. I have on my FPP, you see here that I have 10 schedules, 5 playlists, 32 sequences, 57 audio files, 2 videos, a command preset, and 12 scripts. So I have quite a bit of stuff on here. And this is a 32 gig card. I didn't have a 16 gig card, so I used a 32 gig. And you see that I'm only using 22%, and I have quite a bit of stuff on here. So you see that the 32 gig is, if it was an 8 gig card, this is what the status would be. And if it was a 16 gig, this is what it would be. So you see, you really don't need a super big card in order to make things work. You're going to need to get the FPP image. It's best to use the most current release because most of the bugs have been already fixed, or at least all the known bugs have been fixed. And if you do find a bug, please report it so that they can fix it. You're going to need some sort of imaging software. The 3 most popular are Raspberry Pi Imager, Balena Etcher, and dotNet Disk Imager. You're going to need to know your network configuration, like I mentioned. You might need an SD card adapter if your computer doesn't support a micro SD card. So you might need to use an adapter in order to gain access to that to write the image. A network or USB adapter, depending on the device you use and the installation method. You might need a USB network adapter if you're going to install Wi-Fi, say on like a BeagleBone system, or a USB adapter to an Ethernet adapter, just depending on your system. So we're going to go over the installation methods. There's three basic methods. You have the USB tether method, which will work on the BeagleBone systems, the BeagleBone or Pocket Beagle, and also works on the Pi Zero. You got the Wi-Fi tethering method, and that works good with any device that has a Wi-Fi adapter that supports AP mode. Not all Wi-Fi adapters support AP mode. Even though they do support Wi-Fi communication, they don't have the AP mode. If you want to get one with an AP mode, I'd suggest getting one from culplights.com or Wired Watts, because those work. I have purchased some off of Amazon that said they support AP mode, but when I tried to use them, they didn't work. And then the last one is the network connection method, which is probably the most common method. And any device that has an ETH0 port can use this to connect and configure your controller. So now we're going to get the FPP image. And I recommend getting the most current release because, like I said, all known bugs have been fixed in it. Doesn't mean that there won't be bugs, but if there is, please report it and it'll get fixed. So I'm going to show you how to get the image. In the bottom, I've got a link to the releases section so that you can get there. And when you go to that web page, you'll see something like this. So the releases section will be something like this, and it'll show the latest on top. And if you scroll down, you'll see an asset section. Sometimes that asset section, depending on your browser, will be collapsed and you can't see it. So expand that out so that you can see the assets. Now you want to get the image for the device that you're using. If it's a BeagleBone based image, then you'll get the one that says this and get the image. If it's a Pi based device, then you'll get this one. FPP OS is for a different type of installation method, and that's if your device is already up and running. But for the initial one, you want to get one of these two. So we're going to get the 6.3 BBB image, and then click on that and download it. And you'll see that it's downloading, and when it's done, then we'll go to the next step. I'm going to go ahead and speed it up so that you don't have to wait. Okay, now that it's done downloading, now we'll go to the installation method. So select the installation method of your choice. I'm going to go over the dotNet disk imager program on how to image your disk with that. It's my favorite method of doing it. It's simple and to the point. And I've got a link to the program down below if you want to use that one. So let's get to it. So here's the dotNet disk imager. You'll select your image file. I'm going to select the BeagleBone for this one. So you select the device. Make sure that you're selecting the right device. If you have more than one USB device or device that's available in here, make sure you choose the right one, because whatever you write to, it's going to overwrite that and you'll have nothing available. Then when you get that selected, you really don't need to select any of these options. If you want to wipe the device, which is basically doing a format, you could do that. It's not really necessary because this does a complete overwrite. And then select Write to Device. And once you select that, it's going to give you a warning telling you that you're going to destroy whatever data was on there and ask if you want to continue. So you select yes, and then it's going to write to that device. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward, and when it's done, we'll come back. Alrighty, it's done writing now. Now you're ready to go to the installation method that you want to use. Remember, I've got the chapters down below. Feel free to go to the section that you want to go to. Okay, now we're going to go over how to create your image using Balena Etcher. I got a link down in the description below to the Balena Etcher program. Feel free to go there and get that if that's the method you want to use. So this is the Balena Etcher program. So you're going to select your image. I'm going to select the Pi image for this. Make sure that this is the correct SD card, because if you select the wrong device, it's going to overwrite all the data. So you want to make sure that that's correct. And then you just click on Flash. You'll get a warning saying, do you want to allow this device to make changes? Go ahead and say yes. And then it will start. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to the end. Okay, now you get this warning up here. Do not format the disk. This is because it's a Windows program, cannot recognize the file format. And we're not using a Windows file format. So you do not want to do that. So cancel out of these windows. So it says it's complete. There's been a lot of people that report that it'll say unsuccessful, but when they install it, it actually works. And there's been some people that when they try to flash it, it immediately will fail. And it's because you have to give permissions to the file to access it, but I'm not quite sure what it was that they did originally that created that. So at this point, go down to the installation method of your choice, and I've got links down below to go to that method. Okay, we're going to go over how to image your card with Raspberry Pi Imager. Just so you know, you can create the BeagleBone images with the Raspberry Pi Imager. Raspberry Pi Imager is just an imaging software, but it has some enhancements for Raspberry Pi products to make it a little bit easier, but we're not using that aspect of it. But a lot of people have this so that they still use that. So you can use this for either image, it doesn't matter. So here's the interface. I've got a link down below to the program so that you could download it. Okay, we're going to choose the operating system. So select the Choose OS here. We're going to scroll down to the bottom of your list, and it's going to be Use Custom. Then from here, you're going to find your file. I'll select the date modified to get the most current one on top. And I'm going to do the BeagleBone image just so you see that it will work. So select that image. So you're going to choose the storage. This will select your available storage devices. Make sure it's the correct one, because whatever you select is going to get overwritten. And then you select on the right. It's just confirming, saying that you're going to lose all the data on there. Do you want to continue? Say yes. And then go ahead and cancel if you get any pop-ups like this. And the Raspberry Pi Imager has some options to configure networking and different aspects like that. That will not work with the FPP Image. It'll work if you're doing the Raspberry Pi OS, but it doesn't work with the images for FPP. We're going to go ahead and fast forward to the end. I'll be back with you in a minute. All right, so this is done. It's going to ask you if you want to do another card, and you can continue. At this point, go ahead and skip to the installation method that you want to use. I got links down below. we're going to go over the installation methods. There's three basic installation methods, and which one you use, most of the time it's personal preference, but sometimes you're limited by the hardware that you're using as well. You have the USB tethering method, which this works really well for the BeagleBone devices, including BeagleBone Green, Pocket Beagle, and any of the other variants. It also works good with the Pi Zero. The Wi-Fi tethering method works good for any device that supports the Wi-Fi AP mode. Not all Wi-Fi adapters support AP mode, even though they support Wi-Fi communication. It's probably the easiest method to configure a Raspberry Pi Zero. Then you have the network connection method, and this will work good for any device that has an ETH0 port and is probably the most common method used, but any of the methods work good as long as your device has the hardware to support it. Okay, we're going to go over the network installation method. This method is where you will connect your FPP device with a network cable directly to the same network that your computer is on. Do not connect it directly to your computer or laptop. That requires some advanced configuration on your computer or laptop in order to get work, and that's beyond the scope of what this video is for. You want to make sure that your device has all the required network interfaces that you're going to need. If you're going to configure the Wi-Fi and you need to have a Wi-Fi interface installed, make sure you do that. If this is the first time installing FPP on a BeagleBone Black that is older, you need to hold down the S2 button on the BeagleBone. And that is on right here. That's the S2 button on the BeagleBone. The older BeagleBone Blacks had the firmware wouldn't read from the SD card, so you had to do that. But all the newer BeagleBone ones has the newer firmware, and it works fine. So you don't have to do that for the newer ones. But if it doesn't work, you can do that. You'll press and hold that button for about 5 seconds after you power it up. After you power that up, you'll have these 4 LED lights here that'll be flashing blue. Once that's the case, then you're good to go. So once your network device has booted up, then open up a web browser, and hooking up a monitor to the Raspberry Pi devices really doesn't give you much useful information. But once it's hooked up, there's several ways that you can go through to get to the device. Usually you could just go in and type in http:// http://fpp.local/ and that will pull up your device. And then you will be at the initial configuration, initial setup page. However, sometimes depending on your network, the FPP local will not get resolved correctly. And there's some other methods that you could use. So you want to use some sort of IP scanning software to find it. Or if you've got access to your router, you can go into your router directly and see what it has assigned. So let's go to Xlights and then go Tools, X Scanner. And you get the window will pop up here, and it's going to scan your network for all of the devices. And down here you could see the pinging going on. And once the ping gets to 0, that means it's complete, but you really don't have to wait for that. Usually it'll pop up here and you could see it before it comes. These devices here are devices that Xlights is trying to find because it's configured in Xlights, so it does a little extra work beyond what a normal IP scanner would do. And it will be a device that just says FPP because we haven't configured it yet. Okay, you see here that it's populated and there's a device here called FPP. That's the one that we want. So the IP address is 192.168.0.72. So you can plug that into your browser and pull it up. Just a warning, is 6.3 and earlier versions, we discovered there's a little bug that's going to be fixed in future releases. But if you change your host name at the very beginning, then now your device isn't going to be communicating correctly because you accessed it with the host name of fpp.local and you changed the host name, so fpp.local doesn't exist anymore. So if you're going to change the host name and you accessed it by the host name, not the IP address, change it at the very last, because those settings, all your other settings, you won't be able to get to. So if you assessed it by the IP address, then that's not a problem because that's how it's going to be looking for it. So if you have any questions which any of these do, there's question marks that have a little help pop up. So you're going to set up your player mode, either player or remote, and you can change that at any time. The host name, I'd strongly suggest changing that to something other than FPP. Take into account the warning that I gave you. If you have all your devices with the same host name, there's some things that might not work correctly. So we're going to call this main player. Host names cannot have spaces or special characters. The only special character is that dash. Host description, that could be something additional information that'll show up in some of the FPP pages. It's not required. The share statistics, FPP will gather some anonymous statistics on how you use it. You can elect whether to have a message to remind you to share it, not to share it, or to always share it. I like to enable it. That way it shares it with the developers and it helps them in looking at different areas and with their development efforts. Crash data, this is similar to X-Lights in the crash data. You could include your settings and configurations or none or whatever, but that I'm not going to go into all the details with that. Fetch the cape logos from vendors. The FPP image doesn't have enough information to put the vendor logos on it, so it has to reach out to the vendor's website to get that, and that's here, the Wired Watts logo. If you want that enabled or not, you can. Same thing with the serial numbers so that they could identify what's the correct logo. Locale, this is to use for scheduling for holidays. So if it's USA, it's going to select some of your USA holidays. Time zone, this is so it'll display the correct time. So you'd want this to be your location. If your device is hooked up and able to reach the internet, you could actually look up the time zone and it'll find it for you. The latitude and longitude, that's used for calculations for sunrise and sunset if you want to use that in your scheduler and want to use references to sunrise or sunset. It has to know where you are. And again, if you're hooked up to the internet, you could look up the location and it'll find it. If you want to verify, you could show on the map. Now, it might not show your exact location because it's going to depend on your network setup and where your servers are and that type of stuff. But as long as it's close, that's all that really matters for sunrise and sunset. Now for the UI password. Due to the IoT laws, now they require the user upon installation to set these options to what they want. The UI password doesn't really provide any additional security for FPP or your network. All that does is it will not let people, if they have access to your network, to get into your FPP device. This was actually set up for like going to conventions and different things like that where you were using the tethering mode and everybody was broadcasting the same thing. You don't want them to be able to get into it. but as far as a home network configuration, putting a UI password on your FPP device is kind of like putting a lock on your refrigerator in case someone breaks into your house. If somebody's got access to your network, they're probably not going to want to go into FPP and mess with things. They probably got some more important things that they want to do. The OS password, the other IoT thing, you could save it at default. This is if you have a SSH shell that you want to get in, or you want a PuTTY or something like that in. It's what the password is. Keep it at the default, make it easy. If not, just remember what it is. Once you have those set, go to Finish Setup. And then you got here the option to go to storage settings. You want to expand the settings so that you can use the whole card. There are rare occasions where you might not want to expand it, and you can leave it unused and it will clear that banner. But this is real important to do for when you go on, because you have very little space to be able to save any settings. So go to the storage settings, and then you're going to go grow to file system. And then after, you're going to say yes. And once it's done, you get the option to close it. It's closed. And anytime you get this warning, you want to do it when we're in this initial process. You probably don't want to reboot, but now that you've done all of your changes, you probably want to reboot. Okay, now that it's rebooted, you want to go to your network and configure your network. Okay, now that you're at the network page, you want to go through and set up your network based on how you're going to use it in your show. So you can keep it at DHCP and it'll get the address. Just remember that this might change. Your address might change. Or you can do static and set it up to the address that you want on either the ETH0 or WLAN 0 interface. I'm not going to go into all of the other configurations for the network, other than just to show you how it's done. But this needs to be done according to how you're going to do it in your show. And you could refer to the manual or the video that I linked showing about network setups. So in this case, we're going to change it to ETH0, set the address to 192.168.0.251. Net mask almost always is 255.255.255.0. Gateway is going to be the IP address of your router. Typically, it's the same subnet, the first three with 1, but there are some that will use a 254 or some other number. So just verify that that's what it is first. Once that is configured, you're going to update the interface. And then it's going to tell you to check the DNS. If you use a static address, which we did, you need to set up a DNS server. So you're going to go to the host DNS settings. And here, typically you want to set up 2 DNS servers. One is going to be to your router, 0.1. And typically one is going to be a network-based DNS server. In this case, it's 8.8.8.8, which is a Google one, which is very reliable. But that's totally up to you. But these are the recommended ones: your router and web-based DNS server. Update your DNS, reboot, and you're done. After that, it's going to be based on your show and everything else. So that's all that you need to do. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you and have a good day. Okay, we're going to use the Wi-Fi tethering process for installing and configuring FPP. You want to make sure that you have your network interfaces installed, and make sure that your Wi-Fi adapter supports AP mode. Like I mentioned, not all Wi-Fi adapters support AP mode. If you're installing this on an older BeagleBone Black, you need to press and hold the S2 button when you boot it up. So you'll need to you'll insert the SD card into the device, power it on, and for the BeagleBone, you're going to hold this S2 button when you power it on for about 5 seconds. These blue lights will flash and start randomly flashing, and then you're ready to go ahead and continue the installation. So once it's booted up, which will take about a minute or two, you'll need to go over to your network devices and connect to the FPP network. Now this network is local only to the device, and you'll see here that there's the FPP network. Macs are going to be a little bit different. I don't have a Mac to demonstrate, so you'll have to hopefully know how to do that. So you're going to connect to your FPP access point. You're going to connect. The password is going to be Christmas with a capital C. And it doesn't really matter because it's a closed network. And you're going to see that you're not going to have any network availability. So to get to that, you're going to want to go to 192.168.8.1, and that'll take you to the interface. Now you're going to be here at the initial setup, and you can see that we're accessing it through the access point. So it shows the A, and that's the address. You're going to set up the player mode, either player or remote. You're going to set up the host name. Because this had a cape, it defaulted to the cape. If you have more than one of the same device, make this host name something unique. If you have the same host names across your network, there's some things that might not work correctly. If you're not sure what any of these items are, hover over the tooltip and it'll tell you what the different things are. I'm not going to go into the details because that's for a different video. Share statistics. This will share statistics, anonymous statistics, with the developers as to how you're using it. If you're in player mode, how many channels, things like that. So select the option that you want on this. While you're in AP mode, I would not restart FPPD or reboot, because then you're going to have to log into your AP again, and it's not needed for any of these minor configuration changes that we're doing. Crash data, this is similar to Xlight's crash data, but with FPP you get to decide what it sends to the developers. The cape logos, the FPP image doesn't have enough room to store logos on it. So if you want the fancy logo display up in the corner over here, it's got to have access to the internet, plus you have to allow it. Same thing with the cape serial numbers. The locale, this is used for holidays, for scheduling. If you want to tell it to start a certain schedule on, say, Easter, which isn't always on the same day, you could select that, or Halloween or whatever. So select the country that you're in. The time zone, because we're not hooked up to the internet right now, you can't use the lookup time zone or lookup location function. So you want this time zone to be correct. You can manually go through, which it's a pain in the butt, or after you connect to the internet, go in and do the lookup sections. But for the initial setup, that's not that important right now. Down here, you have the enable UI password. Because of the IoT laws that have recently been passed, they can't have these set to defaults. They force the user to actually select something. So for the UI, you have to set whether you want to enable the UI password or not. Enabling the UI password will only prevent someone from getting access to FPP interface if they're already in your network. So setting it is kind of like putting a lock on your refrigerator in case somebody breaks into your house. It doesn't provide you any type of network security. So This was designed for conventions where people were broadcasting their AP mode, and then you had it kind of open and other people could get to it. But for your home network, you really don't need it. The OS password, again, this was an IoT law that got passed to where you have to set that up where you can't default to a set password. So you have the option of setting a custom one. I recommend just keeping it at the default Falcon, and that way you don't have to remember. Once everything has been configured here, you're going to finish the setup. And then you need to expand the SD card. The SD card has very little room for storage. So you want to expand it so that you have that room. So once you do that, you're going to grow the file system. And it says growing the file system required a reboot to take effect. You want to proceed, say yes. And it's all done. Then it asks you to reboot. Don't reboot at this point. You can, but if you do, you're going to have to log back into that FPP AP mode. There is enough room on the SD card to save your network settings, so you can go ahead and go to the network and do your network settings. But I wouldn't recommend doing too much more until you reboot and get onto it with the correct network. So at this point, you're going to set up your network settings. If you're using Wi-Fi adapters, I'd suggest using the external ones. That uses the ones that the Wi-Fi adapter itself has on it, and those usually work the best. But sometimes you got to change it. I'm not going to go into all the different network settings. Like I mentioned, there's a video that I have, and in the FPP manual down below, there's links to both of those. It tells you the different networks. So you have to know how you're going to hook it up. I'm just going to go through the steps. So we're going to change this to static. Going to change the IP address to 0.2.168.0.251. And the net mask is going to be 255.255.255.0. Gateway is going to be your router, which typically they're either 1 or 254, but not always the case. So make sure that this is your router. Going to update the interface. You're going to get a warning saying because we used a static address, we have to set up the DNS server. So you're going to go to your host and DNS settings. It's recommended to use the address of your router and an outside network-based DNS server. The option that you choose is up to you. 8.8.8.8 is a good one. That's Google, and it's got a lot of uptime, but that's up to you. Update the DNS, and at that point you can reboot and you'll be able to get onto it with your new network settings. So I'm going to go ahead and update again just to make sure. And then we're going to reboot. And I'm going to go ahead and speed it up at this point. Okay, now that it's rebooted, once you have this configured, you're not going to be able to access it through this 8.1 interface because you're not tethered to it anymore. So you need to access it with your new IP address of the 192.168.0.251. And now you see that you're accessing it with that. You've got the logo up here. And the time for me is off because we didn't do that. So now that you're here, you could go to the FPP settings, go to the time, look up your time zone, and go to system and look up your location. You can look at the map to see where it is, and it should be close. So after you have those settings done, Going to restart FPPD, and now you're ready to start playing with the other aspects. Have a great day and enjoy your show and playing. Okay, we're going to go over the USB tethering method of installing and configuring FPP. Need to give you a warning. If you're using the Culp Lights K4PB version 2.0 or the K40PB version 3.0, which were produced in 2022, don't use the USB tethering method or power your Pocket Beagle using a USB cable while it's connected to the cape. The voltage regulator that he was using on him were unavailable, and he used a different one on this version of boards, and they don't work good with the voltage, and it ends up burning it up, and you're going to have to permanently power the two separately. So if you're using these or anything in the future, verify to make sure that it's going to work correctly with USB tethering. If you're not sure, use one of the other methods. So with the USB tethering, you want to make sure that you have your network interfaces installed. If you're going to configure Wi-Fi, then make sure you have the Wi-Fi adapter installed, and Ethernet, and vice versa. So make sure that you have the network interfaces that you're going to do. Make sure you're using a USB cable that supports data transmission. With a lot of these 5-volt power supplies that are out there for different devices, there's a ton of USB charging only cables. They're not marked anything specific, so you got to be careful because they will they're not going to provide the data. So you want to make sure that you have no other power connection to it as well. And to access it, once it's up and booted, you're going to access it using 192.168.7.2 if you're on a Windows computer, and 192.168.6.2 if you're on a Linux or Mac computer. So if this is a BeagleBone Black based system and it's an older one, their firmware had an issue that the bootloader would not boot to the SD card unless you press and held the S2 button for about 5 seconds after you powered the BeagleBone up. So you have to press and hold that button, power it on, and hold it for about 5 seconds till these data lights start flashing. That's only on the older BeagleBone versions, or BeagleBone Black versions. Any of the others it didn't apply to, and the newer ones, they fixed that bootloader so it doesn't work. So once that's hooked up, then you're going to access your FPP device, and we're going to go to 2.168.7.2. That's going to pull it up, and you're going to be at the initial setup page. So you're going to set up the player. If any of these things you're not sure what they're for, the help tips will pop up and tell you what they're going to do. Change this to player or remote. The host name, change this to something meaningful that makes sense to you. You can't have any special characters or spaces, but you can use a dash. Keeping everything with the same host name can cause problems, so give this a meaningful name. I'm going to call this Main Show. And like I said, it really doesn't matter as long as it makes sense to you. The host description, make it something meaningful to you. The share statistics, the FPP will send anonymous user stats to the developers to help them in the development process. So select what you want. In the FPP manual down below, it has a lot more information on what these settings are. I'm just going to go through it for purposes of the video. Save crash data with FPP. This is like Xlights, except now you can include what you want sent to the developers or nothing at all. Fetch cape logos from vendors. If the FPP image doesn't have enough room to install the logos for the capes, so you have to allow FPP to reach out to the internet to get that if you want it. You don't have to. Same thing with the serial numbers. the locale. This is to use for holidays, so select the country that you're in for the programmed holidays that are in the scheduler. The time zone, you're going to select the time zone that you're in for accurate time. Now, most of the time, you can just look up the time zone and it will find it. If not, once you get it configured to your network and it has access to the internet, you can do the lookup time zone. Latitude and longitude is used for sunrise and sunset calculation. So if you are going to use that functionality, then you want to have the location accurate. So you look it up and it'll find it. You can show on the map where it is. Now, it doesn't have to be exact, and it probably won't, depending on your network configuration and your internet service provider, but as long as it's fairly close. Due to IoT laws, FPP can no longer by default have these options selected. You have to select them. Enabling the UI password is only going to we're going to disable it. It is only going to block people from getting into your FPP user interface if they've already hacked into your network. So enabling a password for your UI for most installations really doesn't provide any network security. It's kind of like putting a lock on your refrigerator in case someone breaks into your house. This was developed for conventions and things like that where several people were connecting to an open network, or they were using the AP mode. So that's something that you might want to use if you're in that type of situation. But for your home network, it's really not needed, or does it provide any benefit. The OS password, this is if you're going to use like a SSH shell or PuTTY or something like that to access it. You have to set the OS password. The IoT laws do not allow you to set a default one. I'd suggest using the default one, so if you need help, people will be able to get access to your device and help you out. And once you get that configured, then finish your setup. And then you have to expand the storage. The image has very little storage space left to save time on the imaging. So you need to expand the storage to get full use of your card. So you want to grow the file system, and it says growing the file system will require a reboot. Do you want to proceed? You say yes. And once it's done, you'll get a closed message. It's closed and done. So then now you can reboot now. What we're going to do, changing the network settings, doesn't use much memory, and there's enough room for that. So we can go ahead and go to the network page. This here, you're going to configure it for your network, how you're going to set it up. If you're using Wi-Fi, usually the external drivers are the best. And you see here, I only have a WLAN 0 interface, and I'm going to set it up for static. And I'm going to set an address 192.168.1.252. Net mask is going to be 255.255.255.0. The gateway is going to be the address of your router. It typically ends in 1 or .254, but verify that before you commit. Okay, you need to enter your WPA SSID, which is your network credentials for your Wi-Fi. So enter that and your pre-shared key to gain access. And then update the interface. And it's going to say, don't forget to set a DNS server. So we'll need to do that. Going to go to host and DNS settings. And your DNS server, you typically want one of them to be your router. Not all routers will handle outside DNS requests. And the other one's going to be an internet-based DNS server. 8.8.8.8 is usually a good one, but feel free to use the one you want. Then update the DNS. Now that we have the network settings configured, then we can reboot and be able to connect to the network. So we're going to reboot. And while it's rebooting, I'm going to fast forward. and you see now that it is up. You see the address 1.252 on the WLAN 0. Now you're good to go to start all of your other fun, configuring your ports and everything else. Have a great day and enjoy your new hobby. Okay, that wraps this video up. I hope this cleared up any questions or issues that you had while installing FPP. If you have any questions or need any more information, let me know. Down below, I have links to several resources that might help you out. The FPP Manual is a good resource, but probably the best resource out there for any of your questions is going to be the X-Lights Zoom Room. I have a link for that down below as well. So I hope you guys have a great day and enjoy your hobby, and enjoy.